Hey everybody, and welcome to Simulmedia Live. My name is Matt Collins. I'm so glad you can join us from wherever you're watching and however you're watching, whether on LinkedIn or Twitter, Periscope, Zoom. It means an awful lot that you've taken some time to join us today, and I promise you will not be disappointed. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. You know, one of the things that Simulmedia has been tracking since a work from home and shelter in place orders became pervasive is how would video consumption change? And not surprisingly, it's up across the board. And folks can follow this on our blog. We've actually created an interactive site with our data science team on Observable, a link that we'll share in a blog update on this video when we publish. And that, in fact, maybe our folks behind the scenes can post that link in the LinkedIn and Twitter feeds for this. But it shows without a question that linear TV is viewing. We'll put some visuals on the screen a little bit later in the program. And OTT is up. And so this subject of viewing and video consumption has come up in some recent live streams. Last week, we spoke to a couple people who talked about it. MSG, Matthew Scott Goldstein talked about how we are in for the golden decade of content. It never has been better for consumers. And then we also heard from Brad Behrens, the editor-in-chief of the IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, who talked about how the complexion today of providers of OTT services is certainly going to change a lot in the next several years, if only because you have such dominance by Netflix and Amazon Prime, with everybody else sort of racing to catch up. But as more come online with the likes of Peacock and others, and as more ad-supported OTT options become available, he fully expects that environment's going to change. And here to talk about all of this with us is the CEO of LUMA Partners, a guy I'm a big fan of, Terry Kawaja. And Terry has been tracking this on his own for a while. I've seen some of the content that Terry has put out, and now, Terry, I'm seeing your background for the very first time, very sharp. Good to have you on. Thank you so much for being with us on Simulmedia Live, sir.
Great to be here, Matt.
Terry, before we get into the theme at hand, you have been doing a great webinar. I mean, first of all, for people who haven't seen Terry's stuff, he is a great marketer, and he is a savvy tech guy in terms of like the content that he creates. He's a really good content creator in all seriousness. And you've come up with a webinar you're calling the Work from Home series. Tell us a little bit about what that is and why you're doing it.
Yeah, sure. So we got this notion sort of 6 weeks ago, so right at the early days of the lockdown. And what we kind of felt was, you know, let's try to have some semblance of normality. And what would normality be for me? It would be talking about the issues in and around digital media and marketing, often at conferences or directly with clients and folks in the ecosystem. So we thought, well, why not just do that? Recreate it in a virtual fashion. And so we launched this series. We've completed 6 of the 7 episodes. We're even giving it streaming nomenclature. Episodes of season 1, where we often bring on a guest and we parse through a variety of issues over the course of about an hour. We've got season 2 coming up, and I'm very much looking forward to that. All kinds of great guests to come on and lend their expertise in their operational area about what's happening. And at the end of the day, it's also about connectivity, right? I mean, we want to, now that we're all at home and secluded, we want to, have a conversation, see and feel and hear the people that we're used to. And in particular, I didn't want it just to be about COVID-19. I wanted it really to be about these underlying issues, of which, of course, COVID-19 has a major impact on. But look, I wanted to have it feel more like what we would otherwise be doing in real life.
You've succeeded in it, and I think you've hit on something that is right now a craving for many of us who are working from home, and that is conversations with smart people. And I was talking with a colleague of mine yesterday who was reflecting on a virtual event that he did and for the Advanced Advertising Summit the other day. And And he said it was just so refreshing to have conversations with really intelligent people in ways that he's otherwise just not able to have in the same kind of, with the same kind of regularity, and certainly without the same kind of intimacy. And
Right.
your webinar rather is doing a great job, and it's also really well produced. I encourage people who are watching this, when they're done, you'll go a lot more. If anyone watching this is going to get a chance to go a lot deeper on the things that Terry is tracking in the areas that he just described through that webinar. So I encourage people
Well,
to
we
check it out.
I appreciate that, Matt. Every Wednesday at 2 p.m. And you can find us on social media to grab the links, or on lumapartners.com. Thanks.
And we'll put that up too for the folks who are, I know, behind the scenes on this live stream. We'll get those up on our LinkedIn, our Periscope feed, so that people can access that now. So in a moment, Terry, we're going to talk about where you see winners and losers emerging from the current situation, or maybe not polite to talk about losers, but maybe talk about the people who stand to win more under the current circumstances. But to set the table, I want to go through sort of a setup of where Simulmedia sees the current video landscape, and then everyone will have an opportunity to sort of see what it is that we're seeing. So the first thing which we'll point out is that linear viewing, like all video viewing, is up. It's up across the board. About the only category, not surprisingly, where video consumption is down, not surprisingly, sports. And tonight, hopefully, the NFL draft gives people an oasis in what's otherwise been a dry desert landscape for sports viewing. In fact, our prediction software is anticipating that there will be close to 7 million viewers who tune into ABC's broadcast of the first round of the NFL draft tonight. So that will certainly satisfy some of the appetite. But linear TV is up substantially. And if we can show, Cliff, the very first slide that I prepared, this will give some visualizations to just how much. I'll go back to the first slide. We'll get to this one in a bit. It's a line chart, Cliff, that there you go. Viewing in the time of COVID-19. And so what basically this is showing is spikes in viewing that have happened week over week since the beginning of March. And though it has started, you can see to the right of that graph that the line is starting to trend back down. It is still substantially higher than it was at the beginning of March, and this reflects the fact that there are just a lot more viewers at home watching linear television. And as I said, every genre is up. Family shows up, news way up, entertainment, drama, all of it up, up, up. And in fact, so much so that since the beginning of March, there have been a cumulative 5.5 billion additional impressions in market. We're going to be updating this data later today to show how changes in the market have unfolded just over the last week. If we can go to the next on OTT, there's a bar chart I want to share that shows OTT viewing. OTT viewing is up also. It was up 13% in March, according to ComScore. Netflix reported blockbuster surge of 16 million subscriptions. I think, Terry, I have that right?
That's correct.
So they are clearly profiting as a result. What this shows is a subscriber count distributed by providers. And this comes to us from JP Morgan. I'm sure these numbers now have changed a lot since I believe these were captured in early March. I know Disney has grown, Disney Plus has grown an awful lot, but it points out here where the dominance is. And not surprisingly, it's in Netflix and Amazon Prime. They each have very different business models, which we'll get into. But OTT is way up, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. At the same time, there are some interesting and I think for many people surprising systemic barriers that are preventing not only OTT content that's distributed digitally to reach all American homes. It's actually now, with so many people forced to be working from home, the digital divide, just simply as measured by access to broadband, has never been, I think, more important for us to acknowledge as a nation. So, Cliff, why don't we show the broadband slide that shows, this comes to us from Pew Internet Research. We have a slide that shows what percentage of U.S. adults have home broadband access. And right now we're at about 73%. You can see that line to the right has kind of been stubborn, if I can call it that. It's just sort of hanging around this sub 75% level. clearly as a country, we have work to do to extend home broadband and get more people access, not just to television and entertainment content, but everything they need in order to have a full digital life. On the issue of smartphones and smartphone access, which a lot of places, especially you go around the world, places like India, China, they've skipped the home broadband through a laptop thing. They've gone straight to smartphones. And when we show that chart, and it'll be the last one that we show before we get into the discussion clip, I show the next one, which shows a stack chart that shows both broadband and smartphone penetration. And this again comes to us from Pew Internet Research. And what they show is that it gets a little bit better. On the one hand, 81% of US adults have a smartphone. That doesn't seem so surprising. What was a little weird was that 17% of them have a smartphone but don't connect to any broadband services. So that works out to be about 68% of adults have a smartphone with a broadband connection. So there's clearly a gap that we need to close to get more people online digitally. Now, all of this that I've presented, surge in linear viewing, surge in OTT viewing across the board, represents an opportunity as well as a challenge to figure out for advertisers. It's certainly going to be one that's going to have winners and losers on the content side. Agencies are going to have things to work out. Let's dive in, Tara. I'm really eager, having shared this and knowing what you know, I'm really eager to hear what you think. First of all, we'll start with this issue of the broadband penetration, whether by fixed line of the house or smartphone. How much bigger do you think OTT can get as long as we've got that sort of ceiling of, say, 70 to 75% penetration of broadband access?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to describe that as a stubborn statistic because it simply hasn't. It feels like it's asymptotically approaching sort of like its natural max. I'm not sure we should care. And by that, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that there's probably a high correlation between desirable consumers to reach and the ones that already have broadband. So, yeah, if there's this stubborn 25% of the population, that doesn't have broadband to the home and/or, 19% of the population that doesn't have a smartphone, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that the correlation between that cohort and age, they're probably a lot older, income is probably a lot lower, spending propensity, it's probably way lower. So, from the standpoint of a marketing lens and advertisers trying to reach desirable audiences, oh well, so we're not going to get those people. I'm not sure it's going to matter that much.
Certainly, I can see that being a concern, or maybe not a concern at all, as you described, for certain categories. I would imagine if you're a CPG product that targets all, if you're a manufacturer if you're Clorox bleach, or if you're Tide, or if you're Oscar Mayer, and you sell to a very broad audience, that stubbornness would impact perhaps the enthusiasm with which you would throw your advertising behind an advertising supported OTT alternative, especially given right now the fact that, at least out of the gate, the clear winners in OTT are ones that do not have advertising at all.
Right. Well, look, I'm sure there are categories, right? Farm equipment, chewing tobacco, the Trump campaign. There are certain advertisers that are going to want to reach those lower education, lower income, lower spend cohort of folks. No doubt.
You're honest as always, Mr. Kawaja.
Hey, it is what it
is. So talk about, let's maybe get your thoughts on that complexion of the OTT environment. You have two clear winners in Netflix and Amazon Prime, but each of them I would think, have gained their foothold, their strong foundation through very different levers. I mean, Netflix is a service that, quite frankly, any of us can cut off at any time. Sure. And the only thing we lose is the Netflix content, which tells me, as Benedict Evans has written before, that Netflix in many ways is really more LA than Silicon Valley. And they're a TV company. As long as their content holds up, people are going to subscribe. Amazon Prime is in a very different boat, given the fact that they offer so much more. How do you see the complexion or the landscape of OTT providers shaking out, especially as it relates to the challengers coming up and the incumbents and how well they're entrenched?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But maybe first, just a perspective on the line that you opened with, which was TV viewing is up. It's up in linear and it's up in OTT. And I want to make sure that we parse signal from noise here, and we don't conflate the sort of immediate impacts of the coronavirus and the constituent sort of work from home lockdown situation, which will have certain temporary viewing implications. It will have an economic fallout that we ought to talk about that. And then there's the sort of the post-crisis trends to which we would like to sort of figure out if there's a stickiness to anything that's taking place here in terms of these inflection rates. And the reason why I say that is, yes, linear viewing is up, but I am of the view that when we get through this crisis, we will look back and conclude that the trends, the inflection rates that this imposed on everything from viewership to spend to sort of business models in the TV ecosystem will be such that they just acted as an accelerant. Whatever trends were happening pre-COVID are going to happen post-COVID, only probably on a more accelerated fashion. What do I mean by that? Linear viewing is up because we're at home. We have the available time. And so, sure, we're watching TV. But let's not get too complacent with that to perhaps draw the wrong conclusion that, you know what, linear TV is going to do just fine after all. No, we were in this sort of systemic migration of viewership from linear TV to the OTT platforms. You know, you see that in the Netflix numbers. Let's face it, their Q1 additional subs of 16 million was, bear in mind that, you know, COVID only was in the very last month of that quarter. So imagine what that's going to be like in Q2. An extraordinary benefit of growth of OTT viewerships. At the same time, AT&T announced almost 1 million subscriber losses as cord cutting also seems to be accelerating. I suspect that part of that is economic constraints. I mean, when you're not working or you're otherwise financially constrained, that, you know, it's the ARPU of paid TV, linear TV in this country is $102. I don't know how they get there because my bill before I cut the cord was over 200, but nonetheless, that's a lot of discretionary dollars, and I think that has accelerated cord cutting. My suspicion is if we continue with this lockdown or in whatever capacity for, you know, another several months, you are going to see massive cord cutting as people just make the financial decision that that they need to cut out that particular aspect. Now, of course, they're not going to go away, right? They'll either get their free TV via antenna or they'll subscribe to a much cheaper OTT service. So again, viewing is up across the board, but let's not conflate things. I think this is going to be an inflection moment. And, you know, in the analysis that we did, we came up with this presentation we gave called Stream Wars and the Future of TV. And we tried to identify, you know, the sort of weak points of linear TV, the business of linear television. And it came down to two things. One was sports, you know, should sports rights, you know, migrate elsewhere? And second was a potential for a recession. Well, what I didn't consider in January of this year was that a global pandemic would both kill sports outright, at least temporarily, plus bring about a substantial recession. So we have a double whammy that is only mitigated by the fact that everyone's home and has the available time. I think the longer term implications here are pretty severe for linear TV, because what will happen is the ARPU of OTT services, even if you add up, you know, 4 services, the ARPU the average revenue per user is less than half of what you were paying for cable TV. So people will migrate to the OTT channel in order to save money initially, and then depending upon when sports comes back, they may or may not revert back. When people cut the cord, the incidence, and I'd love to see stats on this. I've actually never seen stats on this. What is the incidence of reversion? How many people resubscribe to a cable bundle after they've cut the cord? My suspicion is that it's de minimis.
It would be a fascinating stat to look at. And you talk about the impact that all of this is having economically and really forcing some decisions in the household about where they spend their entertainment dollars. We also talked in the build-up to this about the fact that linear television, of course, is not going to disappear, and it's not going to go away without evolution. And in fact, the numbers, especially for the purposes of advertising, when you look at the number of the ad-supported options and what they are in terms of footprint right now, that's a rounding error compared to where Netflix and Amazon is. So talk a little bit about where, the implications for especially the advertisers who are watching this program, the agencies who are watching the program, in an environment where linear TV viewing is declining overall, gradually in terms of viewership at say 3 to 5% per year. Mm-hmm. How should they be thinking about the right way to leverage the medium?
So it's a good question. And look, this often gets framed as this dichotomy. It's, just look at the terminology, the streaming wars. Wars imply casualties, right? One winner, one loser. You're absolutely right to point out that this is going to be a gradual migration. We talk a lot when we use the acronym CTV a lot, we at LUMA, only we don't use the traditional definition of connected TV because that implies OTT. We like to think of it as convergent TV. So the C in CTV, by our definition, stands for convergent, not connected. And the reason why that's important is because it factors in all 4 channels of video viewing that to consumers is just TV, right? Whether it's linear, the traditional way that we're used to viewing that big rectangle on the living room, or addressable linear, which tends to have targeting via information data provided in the set-top box that allows for dynamic ad insertion based on the household. Third is OTT. That's the one that's growing rapidly with the services like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon that you mentioned. And fourth is digital. So to the consumer, they don't really think about it in these 4 sub-channels of CTV. They're just consuming TV regardless of the device. Contrast that with, or likewise, the marketers, they need to think about these 4 sub-channels of convergent TV holistically because they're trying to coordinate their campaigns and their messaging to these consumers, regardless of which way they're consuming their quote-unquote television. So simple things like frequency capping, right? Of just being able to manage campaigns and knowing to whom you've already messaged to and who you still need to reach. Think about things like retention versus, customer acquisition objectives. You really need to have a more comprehensive and holistic sense of who's viewing on what device and through which channel, because there's a lot of complexity in the middle, right? We gloss over things with acronyms like CTV. The reality is there's different identity parameters, different workflow characteristics, different dynamic ad insertion technologies across all of these sub-channels of CTV. So for marketers, they really have to get a more comprehensive sense. You mentioned OTT as a category in and of itself, but I think we need to parse it down from there because you've got SVOD and AVOD, and in the last 6 months, you could again false positives or signal from noise parsing is necessary. We have had blockbuster fanfare campaigns from some of the largest companies in this country, Apple, Disney, AT&T, Comcast, Quibi, smaller one, but nonetheless, HBO Max, all the launches of these campaigns have been done with incredible fanfare, cross promotion, so that it's essentially free to get many of these services, as well as tons and tons and tons and tons of advertising. And it's working. Why are they doing that? Because the successful launch of these OTT initiatives is existential to these media companies. They need these to be a success, given the migration of those eyeballs from linear to OTT. And so that's why you see these extraordinary campaigns, and it's working, right? Disney Plus garnered an additional 22 million subscribers in the first quarter, now total 50 million subscribers. By the way, that's got to be one of the fastest growth to 50 million subscribers, at least I can recall. Yes, promotions help that, but that doesn't happen on its own. That's a concerted effort, and that's well done, Disney. And you're now seeing it in terms of the tremendous efforts put behind Peacock, and then coming up in a couple of weeks, HBO Max. You're going to hear no end of it, because these companies have to make sure that their campaigns are successful. Now, that having been said, the vast majority of those channels are subscription. They're SVOD, right? And that's logical, because it's a better business model, right, to get paid directly. That's sort of the replacement for what you used to pay the cable company, not as opposed to the advertising. And yet, we believe at LUMA that is going to may have captured the attention in the first 6 months of all these fanfare launches, but the reality is we will have to migrate. And by the way, that's bad news for advertisers, right? That's lost inventory. They really don't get an opportunity to message to consumers with all those eyeballs shifting to an SVOD world. They really don't have an opportunity as a channel to participate in that. But there's hope. We believe, as the adoption of OTT services migrates, down from those, wealthy demos and in from the coasts to the sort of the rank and file, the average American, they're not going to be subscribing to, 5, 6, 7, 8 different subscription services. No, they're going to rely on AVOD services, or advertising supported VOD, which is no doubt why Peacock launched primarily on AVOD. Hulu's on AVOD. A lot of the big media players will have at least either pure AVOD or hybrid subscription and advertising supported channels, because that's really the only way to get all of those eyeballs across the rest of America.
And you're talking about advertising and advertising supported models. Of course, the advertisers, you're exactly right. They can look at the growth of Disney Plus and Amazon Prime and Netflix and be happy as consumers of that content, but it does them no good as advertisers. The scale, without question, when you look at where you still can reach those eyeballs, is on linear. Although I think you would agree that there is an absolute need now to do linear differently, given the conditions that it's in, and then, as you say, keep an eye on ad supported or AVOD to see, as it grows, where the scale is. But also know, and we can see this too, that there's an awful lot of overlap even today among people who have both, because, as you say, that people can afford the Amazon Prime membership annually, the Netflix subscription, the Disney Plus subscription. Guess what? They've got discretionary dollars, and we would submit that they're making their investment decisions based on the programming they want to watch. If they want to see particular shows and particular programs, and they want to see live sports whenever that comes back, or if they want to see stuff on Food Network, wherever that is, they can afford what essentially is a high degree of overlap between customers who have linear and customers who have these OTT services. It's why so many of the companies you mentioned are advertising on linear to get them to migrate over to OTT. For many of those customers, it's an and, not an or, right?
Sure. Absolutely. And look, it depends on what type of advertiser you are. You mentioned, if you're a CPG and you're pushing toothpaste, well, pretty much everyone's in the addressable audience for toothpaste, and it's a low purchase low cost item. So you want bulk, right? I mean, P&G buys TV in bulk. So the advent of CTV and OTT, where you bring digital attributes of targeting and attribution and data, does it help? Not much. Where it does help is where you have higher consideration verticals and intent, like insurance and autos and other types of advertisers like that. Or, for example, where you can target and make sure that you're only addressing the audience that you want to target, that are in market for your product. The other impact it will have is it will substantially democratize TV advertising. This was once the channel relegated only for the largest of advertisers because it's expensive media, because of its bulk scale. Well, the reality is when you can target on CTV and you can pick what addressable audience you want to reach, whether that's on a geo basis or on a demo basis, it democratizes the channel such that much smaller advertisers can take advantage. And then the final consideration would be if you need to reach young people. Well, we know that young people are not watching linear TV, right? The average age of CBS is 68. I think in Fox, it's even Fox News, it's like 71 and aging, which explains a lot. But the reality is, if you want youth, you either got to buy the CW, right, which has youth programs and skews way younger for any broadcast network, or you've got to go to a select cable channel, like a comedy like channel, Comedy Central, something like that. Or better yet, go to OTT, where you're going to find a much, much younger audience.
We would say, and we see this because we've done some studying on this, that the 18 to 34-year-old demo has 36 million viewers on television. And the challenge, though, is that, as with almost every other audience, but maybe especially for this one, because they have and given themselves many more options from not just TV, but also gaming, is that they are watching a lot more different stuff and not in the same concentrations. And so Simulmedia's perspective on this would be that those younger audiences are harder to find. They're not watching, except for sports, they're not watching in bulk together the way that they used to in 30, 40 years ago. And so you need an approach to buy very broadly, knowing that in pockets of different programs, you're going to have only small sections of them representing this younger audience, but they are available. I want to just remind
one thing.
Hang on, Terry, hang on one sec, Terry, because I've been derelict in not inviting the audience to ask questions. If you have questions for Terry, ask them in your feed, and they will come to me. Sorry, Terry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But go ahead.
No. Well, one thing is certain, right? In that the impact, I think, once the data is available to advertisers to know to whom they are able to target and advertise to in a television channel, you never go back, right? I mean, they don't. Once you learn about evolution, you don't go back to creationism anymore. And once you garner the benefits of CTV, why, as an advertiser, would you ever go back to bulk spray and pray old school television? So whether you're looking at linear television and applying data to it so that you get a lot smarter about which spots to buy, or fully addressable like the OTT channel, either way, advertisers, I think, are going to take a much more sophisticated and digitally addressable like approach to the television channel. And I think the notion, again, that you just swap one day from linear to OTT doesn't make any sense. You have to maintain I like to say the swap out the engines from TV to CTV while keeping the planes in the air, because there's about $1.3 trillion of market caps of the TV media companies that we simply can't just let go to zero while we go through this important transition. And a key part of that is being able to offer your advertisers, if you're a platform, the ability to target on linear as well as OTT and digital. They know what they get with OTT and digital. if we can provide them some of that benefit of in the linear channel while the eyeballs are migrating, now you have a real-time, current day, comprehensive solution to marketers.
And what you're talking about, Terry, is essentially a digital approach to television, and
Correct.
digital approach to television, or any platform for that matter, it suggests an audience-based, a people-driven approach. And
Yep.
I completely agree that in today's climate, there is a healthy notion that all of these forms of video should be in scope. If you're an advertiser, be clear-eyed about the distinction between the shiny object of going after something that may offer the precision of targeting, but may not offer any scale whatsoever, versus things
Right.
that offer scale, but if you choose carefully, you'll be able to also get scale plus the tools you need to, as you point out, whether it's addressability or audience based, to be able to go after more efficiently these pockets of
Yep.
audience that you need to achieve what every marketer wants, which is more sales. You get more sales, you get more customers by reaching more customers, and we all have that same
And
objective in
if you
mind.
talk to marketers, they're very excited about the opportunities in CTV. Yes, there's going to be a learning curve they have to get over. Like when we saw programmatic grow from 0 to now 75% of or 80% of all display ad buying. Yeah, there was a learning curve and a complexity that one had to get past in the migration to CTV. Yes, there's a learning curve. And by the way, it'll be a little bit, there'll be a tech tax along the way. But I think once that rationalizes, it'll get back down to the lower take rates that we currently see in mature sectors like television today. And I will tell you, the excitement from brands is palpable. And then the canary in the coal mine is by looking at what people the agencies are staffing in that TV media buying, head of TV media buying at each of the major media agencies. Take a look at the CV, the resume of that particular person, almost across all the holding companies. Over time, we have seen a swap out of a traditional linear TV centric person to now it's a person promoted from the digital side. And I think that's reflective of the fact that the agencies see this sea change coming in terms of the approach that brands are looking to take to TV buying.
Chair, do you have time for a couple questions?
Sure, far away.
All right, so Roberta is asking, which of the AVOD, the advertising supported video on demand services, which of the AVOD providers do you think are best positioned for success, Terry?
Well, I mean, I think AVOD is about reach. So the more scale you have, the better. And so just go with the raw numbers. Whichever AVOD system or channel or platform has the highest numbers, because even the highest numbers in AVOD, right, is still small relative to linear TV. So it's exciting. It's got lots of capabilities that linear TV doesn't, but one thing it doesn't have is scale. So it just numbers, just whoever has the largest viewership of ad-supported TV is going to be the ones that will largely, predominate. I do think the ad experience has to be different. You got to have a lighter ad load. Just even if you're just sticking with 30-second spots, it's got to be a lighter load, just because our nature of media consumption in that channel, we're less tolerant to the crazy 16, 18 slots in per hour in linear. And I believe over time it'll actually change somewhat away from the very static sort of 30, not static, but normal sort of 30-second spot into a little bit more creative like types of messaging.
Do you think, Terry, just building on Roberta's question, do you think that the big incumbents, like, does Comcast have an advantage here because of just all of their resources, their know-how, their access to linear audiences to help give Peacock a boost above the incumbent ad-supported players today?
Well, I think Comcast is in an NBCU is particularly well positioned, because they, with Linda Yaccarino's leadership, have always been a a lean forward organization. Even in the days of traditional linear, they leaned into data analysis. They leaned into different pay models where you see a migration away from impression towards business outcomes. I think I've found them to be a very sort of aggressive and forward thinking organization. And so they have a lot at stake. They have a big, obviously, economic stake in the cable bundle. They're also large, broadband providers. It turns out, by the way, that for every sub loss that Comcast has, its EBITDA margin goes up. It's a little bit contrary to what one might think, but the margins in broadband are higher than those of the video business, and yet you see them. I mean, they're almost up to an announcement a month now from NBCU in terms of an initiative of one sort or another, whether it's a data co-op or a more advanced TV platform. They have of course, acquired Sky in the UK 2 years ago. Sky was particularly progressive as it related to solutions, data-informed TV buying solutions. So yeah, I fully expect that they will continue to be on the leading edge.
That's a good segue to our next question. Sam wants to know, how will COVID impact the merger and acquisition environment as it relates to traditional TV networks and digital OTT challengers?
Yeah. So thank you, Sam. Great question. Awesome question. That's my day job. So look, I think it already has, right? And I think we're going to see 3 waves of M&A implications from this trend. Wave 1 is what we've seen for the last 3.5 years, which is a consolidation of big media companies per se. That is to say, the AT&T, Time Warner deals, the Disney, Fox deals, the deals of the Viacom, CBS. Those are basically deals that bring about consolidation of eyeballs and media channels so that they can at least garner some of the scale to compete against the likes of Facebook and Apple and YouTube and Amazon and Netflix and the like. They still don't compare, right? They still are subscale relative to those tech giants, but nonetheless, that sort of endgame consolidation of the big media giants is well underway, and I believe we'll see a lot more. Just because any company any one of those independent media companies is now way too small to compete. The second wave is where yes, these big media companies can launch their own channels, but in order to either augment that organic strategy with an inorganic acquisition, or to sort of make an acquisition so that they can learn. We've already seen deals whereby all the free AVOD, 3 of the 4 major free AVOD services have been acquired. You had Viacom acquire Pluto last year. This year, then Comcast acquired Xumo, and of course Fox acquired Tubi. That just leaves Crackle Plus, chicken soup for the soul, as the last remaining major AVOD, free TV sort of a channel out there. So there's that element, and then I think the third element is really the technology companies, maybe not the content companies per se, but rather the technology companies in behind this whole CTV revolution that either provide a software solution or a data solution. These are less known companies, Data Plus Math, Clipped, DataZoo. We've seen a whole variety of those types of transactions, and I believe we'll likely see a substantial amount more as the big media companies have to essentially do acquisitions in order to tool up on the technology necessary to compete against these big tech giants as we migrate from this linear world more towards OTT. So thanks, Sam. Great question. And fortunately, it's keeping us super busy.
No, that is a great question, Sam. Thank you for that. I'm going to throw one more out here, and it comes from Darren, and I'm going to take the first stab at it. But Terry, if you want to add on, feel free. Darren wants to know, can you speak about the state of advertising in TV right now, and has it collapsed or will it? And the answer, very clearly based on the evidence, is it has not collapsed. It is still across local and national a $70 billion market. Now, that is likely to decline this year, predominantly because the premium CPMs that networks get from live sports, we all know, are not going to be available at least for some time. We know the Olympics have been canceled. That's billions of dollars off the table there as well. So we know that the total size of the market is going to come down, but there's also no question that from all the data sources that we get about where video viewers spend their time, it's almost 5 hours a day of linear television. A lot of that, as Terry mentions, is an older audience, but even when you get into younger demos, it's surprising. 18 to 34-year-olds are still watching on average about an hour and 15 minutes a day of linear TV. So they are out there. They require different tools to find them at scale. And they're, of course, also much more likely to be watching video of all kinds on different devices. All of which to say is that there is enormous appetite for the content that television content that is ad supported. The revenues support that. The number of people watching, I think Nielsen says 97% of U.S. households are receiving either a cable or over the air signal. So the scale is there, and the demos are there. It's just, as Terry points out, it is shifting, and advertisers and agencies, of course, are watching that shift very carefully to go after what they always have cared about in advertising, why we advertise, period, to sell stuff. And we do that by reaching as many people within our audience as possible. So, Terry, do you have anything you want to add on the state of advertising in TV?
Well, I do think there is going to be a substantial and potentially lasting implication from this crisis we're going through. And that is, if you think about how TV advertising is sold, it's the bulk of it is sold at something called the upfronts, right? In May and June, where over the course of a short period of time, there's every TV publisher has this fanfare presentation highlighting all their shows, talking about their great technologies. They bring out the stars on stage to woo the advertisers and convince them to lock into contracts for the coming year. Well, in a socially distant policy that we have in this lockdown, there are no upfronts this year. They're canceled. And so, fine, that you may say, well, that's just a temporary thing, right? Won't we just get back to that once we lick this virus? Well, let's hope so. But I think there will be a lasting implication, which is 2020, even at its reduced ad pace, will be forced more into a spot market, which, by the way, is how all other media is largely bought, right? It's not reserved in advance with slotting. So I think when we have to go through 2020, where a lot more advertisers are dealing with, managing their campaigns on a more real-time basis, it's not obviously in real time necessarily because of the latency of dynamic ad insertion in linear TV. Nonetheless, I think it will be a big shift away. And what will be interesting to see will be when you add the data available such that it's more like digital addressable media channels, and they have to do it on a more spot basis, a real-time basis, what the implication will be, even when we can get back together and attempt another upfront in 2021.
That's a really interesting insight, Terry, and it's very compelling. I actually think advertisers are going to be drawn to the notion of what the spot/scatter market gives them, because it's flexibility. Yep. And so, we spoke yesterday to Yin Rani, who's the CEO of MilkPep and the milk processor education program. And she was pointing out that, they're planning 3 or 4 different scenarios for Q3 and Q4 right now, because who knows? Right. So advertisers, the last thing in the world an advertiser, I think, would want right now, even if they could go to a big fancy upfront of this kind you described, would be to take wheelbarrows of cash and put it, basically lock themselves into scenarios that are almost impossible to be able to forecast at this moment in time. So spot
Correct.
has advantages.
Absolutely, and by the way, I prefer spot to scatter. I know there are two different approaches to non-planned media, but scatter just sounds derogatory. I mean, we should think about this as agile media buying. That's a better, more positive term.
That's a great point. Terry, we've taken more time than you promised to give us, and so for that, I'm really, really grateful. I'm gonna bring the show down to a close, but before we do, you mentioned the work from home webinar. How else can people follow you and the work you're doing for LUMA Partners?
Sure. Well, we're either LUMA Partners, LUMA_partners, or T Kawaja. It's just my first initial and last name. Our handles on Twitter, and you can find us there on Instagram, all over where your favorite social media. I've only done one TikTok dance, and I don't know. I'm not sure.
Terry, that's one more TikTok dance than I've done. So you're ahead. I think my children would run away from home if they knew that I had done A, anything on TikTok, at 2, and B, may have required some choreography.
Well, my kids would not, they wouldn't be surprised about anything from me, but nonetheless, they chided me about my TikTok experiment, and rightfully so.
I'm sure you loved every bit of the chiding too. I think as a dad, we live for that stuff.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Terry, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you. Really good to have you. Good to see you well, and I hope we can do it again soon.
All right.
All right, everybody. That wraps up our latest episode of Simulmedia Live. I want to thank you all for joining and giving us some attention. I know things are really busy and hectic right now in so many different ways. I hope that you're well. Hope you and your families are well, and look forward to having you on a future episode of Simulmedia Live, which we'll be announcing here those episodes shortly. So until then, thanks so much again for watching, and have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.